When floodwaters swallowed Keanu Reeves' home overnight, no one expected what lay beneath. As crews waded into the wreckage, they didn't find luxury or memorabilia, but something far more shocking. Hidden in the mud was a secret legacy he never meant the world to see. What they uncovered left even hardened professionals in tears. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain started just after dusk, soft and steady, tapping lightly against the wide windows of Keanu Reeves's home nestled high in the Hollywood Hills. It was the kind of rain that felt comforting, the kind that filled a quiet evening with rhythm. Inside the dimly lit living room, Keanu sat barefoot on the couch, legs folded, a leather-bound journal resting in his lap. A pencil in hand, he paused between thoughts as the rain tapped in gentle waves. Soft classical music hummed in the background, low and meditative. Chopin, slow and sad. That night was supposed to be simple, peaceful. He'd turned down a dinner invitation downtown, opting instead for solitude, the kind that always helped him think more clearly. The house, though modern in architecture, felt lived in and quiet. Shelves filled with books, walls lined with photos he never posted publicly. A framed picture of his mother rested near a flickering candle. A note in her handwriting sat just beside it. He looked at it every night. Outside, the rain thickened. Keanu glanced toward the window and noticed the rhythm had changed. What had been a gentle patter had grown heavier, louder, now drumming in uneven pulses. He tilted his head, curious but not concerned. Summer storms weren't rare in Los Angeles anymore. The weather had grown unpredictable in recent years. Still, he didn't move from his spot. Instead, he wrote one more line in his journal and underlined a word with quiet intensity. Another 10 minutes passed. The music stopped. A power flicker. The sudden silence made the rain seem louder. Keanu looked up. The lights came back on a moment later, but his gaze remained on the window. The wind had picked up. The trees outside his property swayed and thrashed like they were caught in a battle with the sky. He stood slowly, placing the journal on the table, and walked to the front window. A flash of lightning lit up the driveway, and that's when he saw it. Water, not puddles, a stream. It was pouring down the steep incline of his long private driveway like a river, rushing with force. It glistened under each flicker of lightning, brown and thick, carrying leaves, debris, and chunks of mud with it. He narrowed his eyes, trying to see where it was pooling. That's when the realization crept in. The drainage system wasn't handling it. He could barely see the grates that usually guided water away from the structure. They were already submerged. He turned quickly, heading down the hallway toward the back of the house. The sound of the rain was no longer gentle. It was pounding, punishing. The wind howled through the trees with rising fury. A loud crack echoed in the distance, either thunder or a fallen limb. Keanu moved with calm urgency, flipping on lights as he made his way to the kitchen and down a short corridor that led to the basement entrance. That's when he heard it, a low creak, not from above, from beneath. He stopped at the foot of the hallway. The sound came again, wood straining under pressure, the unmistakable groan of a door trying to hold back something pressing against it. He walked the last few steps and saw it. The basement door. The bottom edge was wet. Muddy water was seeping in under the threshold in slow, determined streams, dark and thick. Keanu's chest tightened. He placed a hand on the doorknob, hesitating for just a moment. Then he turned it and pulled. What he saw froze him in place. Water. Thick, muddy water covered the entire basement floor. It reached up past the first few steps of the stairwell, swirling with leaves, soil, and unidentifiable debris. The once spotless, temperature-controlled space was now a brown, churning pool. It reflected the bare light bulb above the staircase, shaking with the movement below like a broken mirror. Keanu gripped the door frame as the reality sank in. The basement, his most private place, the quiet archive of decades of letters, journals, and personal mementos, was already flooding. He stepped back. A part of him wanted to rush in, to wade through the rising water and start pulling boxes onto higher ground. But even as he considered it, another wave of water surged from beneath the doorframe, rushing past his feet and soaking the hallway rug. The flow was relentless. He didn't know where it was coming from. He just knew it wouldn't stop on its own. He hurried back to the kitchen, grabbing his phone and flashlight, and flicked on the breaker box to cut the power to the basement. Safety first. He called the city's emergency line. No answer, probably overwhelmed. He tried again. Still nothing. The storm outside was battering the hills, and power lines in nearby neighborhoods were already down. He made a decision. Keanu stepped into a pair of old boots by the back door, pulled on a hoodie, and grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. He descended the stairs cautiously, 1 foot at a time. The air was humid and thick. The smell hit him immediately: wet wood, mud, something sour already blooming in the corners. He shined the flashlight over the rising water and tried to gauge its depth. 3 feet. The shelves along the back wall were half submerged. He moved fast now, stepping into the cold water with a wince. His jeans soaked instantly. He reached the nearest shelf and tried to lift a box. Too heavy. Waterlogged. He opened it instead and saw the contents. Letters. Hundreds of them. The protective sleeves had held up, but not perfectly. Some were already bleeding ink, the paper soft and curling. He grabbed what he could and placed it on the stairs, but he knew it wasn't enough. Behind him, a dull pop. A light fixture above shorted out, sending sparks into the darkness. He didn't flinch. He just moved to the next shelf. Photos, drawings, journals. Each item he pulled felt like a piece of someone else's life, because many of them were. Letters from children, art from hospital visits. Keanu had saved it all. Not in digital folders, not for display. He'd kept the real, physical proof of his quiet connections with people, boxed away with care and precision. The water kept rising. He looked toward the far wall where a fireproof cabinet was partially submerged. That cabinet held the most personal material: his mother's old letters, notes from cancer patients, voice recordings from kids he'd spoken with during recovery treatments. If he couldn't reach that, he didn't know what would be lost forever. He moved toward it. The water now touched his waist. The cold bit into his ribs and tightened his breath. He kept going, flashlight clenched in his teeth, fingers trembling but determined. He reached the cabinet and tried the handle. Locked. The key was upstairs. He turned to go, but his foot caught on something floating beneath the surface. He slipped, crashing into the water. For a moment, he was submerged. Darkness. Cold. The weight of everything he couldn't save. Then he surfaced, gasping. Keanu pushed himself upright, drenched, trembling, but still focused. The fall had knocked the flashlight from his mouth, but it floated nearby. He snatched it up and scanned the water. The current wasn't fast, but the pressure was increasing. Something deeper was at play. More than runoff. A drain failure? A burst pipe? He didn't know. He only knew time was against him. He sloshed his way back to the stairs, taking 2 boxes of letters and a photo album with him. He placed them on the top step, then stood for a moment, chest heaving. Around him, silence had returned, except for the roar of water outside and the steady drip, drip, drip from the ceiling above. He looked back once more at the submerged basement, the fireproof cabinet, the years of memory still underwater, and he whispered to no one, "Please hold on." By the time he reached the top of the stairs and closed the door, the water had begun seeping into the hallway again. He grabbed towels, stuffed them against the frame, and stood guard, soaking wet and silent. The storm raged on outside, wind howling through the canyons, lightning cracking the sky like it was splitting open. But Keanu didn't move. Not yet. He stood in that hallway until the storm finally began to fade, and the rain softened to a whisper. At 2:04 a.m., the house fell silent, and beneath it, a lifetime's worth of quiet kindness slept under 3 feet of water. What he didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that the flood hadn't destroyed everything. In fact, it had revealed something he never meant the world to see. The rain didn't stop until nearly 4 in the morning. By then, the damage was done. Keanu stood at the living room window, arms folded tightly across his chest, watching the streetlights flicker against walls of water. His driveway had become a torrent of mud, lined with debris, tree branches, plastic containers, shattered bricks from a neighbor's retaining wall. Every so often, a car would ease past, its headlights distorted through sheets of rain. One of his neighbors across the canyon flashed a light 3 times from their balcony, a silent way of checking in. Keanu returned the signal. The storm had overwhelmed the entire neighborhood, and beneath his feet, the basement was gone. He had done what he could. After falling in the water, he'd climbed the stairs and locked the door behind him. He'd changed out of his soaked clothes, wrapped himself in a flannel robe, and sat on the edge of the guest bed, listening to the storm until his ears rang with silence. Cutting the power had been the right choice. The water was rising too quickly, and he couldn't risk an electrical hazard. Still, knowing that the cabinet downstairs, filled with letters, drawings, audio recordings, memories, was submerged and inaccessible, gnawed at him. He wasn't thinking about the money. The house was insured. The foundation would be assessed. A team would eventually come and pump out the water. The floors could be replaced. The walls could be treated for mold. But the things he'd kept down there, they weren't replaceable. They were moments, stories, and now they floated in cold, murky silence. By sunrise, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The silence that followed was eerie, not peaceful, just still. Keanu stepped outside and was met by a scene that made his stomach drop. His street, usually pristine and lined with perfectly manicured hedges, looked like the aftermath of an earthquake. Neighbors were already outside in raincoats and boots, assessing damage. Trash bins had floated blocks away. Flower beds were gone. Mud coated every surface. One man stood crying by his garage, where a classic car had floated into a wall and crushed its front end. Keanu approached quietly, laid a hand on the man's shoulder and said nothing, just stood with him. Further down the road, a fire truck was parked at an awkward angle, red lights swirling silently as firefighters checked in on elderly residents. The main road out of the canyon was blocked by a fallen tree. Power lines sagged across several rooftops, still humming faintly. Keanu could hear generators starting up from scattered homes. A news van rolled in an hour later. He watched it pull to a stop just beyond the blockade, the reporters stepping out cautiously, with cameras already rolling. They were scanning the neighborhood for the most dramatic shot. One of them recognized him immediately. She raised a hand, trying to catch his attention. He turned away. The cameraman aimed toward him anyway. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't protest. He just walked inside. He made a single phone call, then another. One to his assistant, letting her know he was safe, and another to a specialized flood damage restoration team that he had used once years ago for a friend's home in Malibu. There was no panic in his voice, just quiet urgency. "I need help," he said, "and please ask them to be discreet." By noon, the sky had cleared, but the destruction remained. Keanu's backyard was a soggy mess of collapsed soil, twisted branches, and washed-out garden beds. A small stone pathway that once led to a meditation bench was buried under a foot of silt. The koi pond overflowed, spilling its contents down the hill. Every detail he had carefully curated over the years had been erased overnight. Inside, The floors were damp from residual moisture, and the air was heavy with the scent of wet wood and earth. Keanu opened all the windows, letting in fresh air and light, trying to clear the feeling of something sacred having been invaded. He avoided the basement door. He knew what waited behind it. His assistant Vanessa arrived by early afternoon. She didn't ask questions when she saw the exhaustion on his face. She simply brought 2 thermoses of black coffee, a pack of protein bars, and a clipboard. She was used to emergencies, just not this kind. They walked the perimeter together, taking notes, snapping pictures for insurance, but Keanu's focus kept drifting toward the base of the hill, where the ground sloped down into his neighbor's yard. That's where the worst of the runoff had gathered. The force of it must have driven water against his house like a wall. "It could have been worse," Vanessa offered softly. "You're okay. The structure's intact." Keanu nodded, but his jaw was tight. "The basement?" "I know," she said. "We'll do everything we can." The restoration team arrived at 3. 3 unmarked trucks pulled into the driveway. No logos, no press. Just quiet professionals in black boots and waterproof jackets. Keanu greeted them himself, shaking each of their hands. Monica, the team lead, introduced herself calmly, clipboard in hand. "We'll start with the basement," she said. "We have pumps and lights ready, but we'll need a few hours to get things cleared." Keanu hesitated before speaking. "Please be careful down there. The things you find, they're personal. Not valuable in the way people usually think, but they mean something. A lot, actually." Monica gave a small, understanding nod. "We've seen all kinds of loss. We'll treat it with respect." As they unloaded their equipment, Keanu walked back inside and stood at the top of the basement stairs. The hallway was dry now, thanks to the towels he'd laid the night before, but the air was heavy with mildew. He touched the doorknob, not to open it, but just to feel the weight of the barrier between him and what had been submerged. He turned away before the team started. There was nothing more he could do right now. Just wait. Upstairs, he returned to the living room and sat in the same spot where the night before he'd been writing peacefully in his journal. The piano music was gone. The quiet was no longer peaceful. Just vacant. Vanessa joined him with 2 mugs of coffee and a stack of folders. "I'll start filing the claim," she said gently. "But you might want to start preparing yourself. Not everything can be saved." He took the mug, staring into the steam. "I know." But part of him still hoped. Not because of the money, not because of the basement itself, but because what was down there had never been meant for the public eye. It was his private sanctuary. A place where he stored the truest parts of his life, the parts few people had ever seen. By early evening, the restoration team had set up industrial-grade pumps and lighting rigs. Hoses snaked from the basement windows, carrying out murky water that smelled of mud, old wood, and something more personal, something sacred that should never have been disturbed. Keanu stood outside as the first surge of water gushed onto his driveway, brown and thick, full of fragments he couldn't bear to identify. The lead technician, Monica, stepped outside and gave a quiet update. "We should be able to enter safely in the next 24 hours. Once the water's down, we'll document everything. It's going to be emotional." Keanu gave a slow nod, jaw clenched. "Just treat it gently." "We will." That night, he barely slept. He paced the upstairs hallway, passing the basement door again and again. Every time, he imagined what might still be floating below. Drawings from children, cassette tapes of hospital visits, letters written by hand, each one folded with care and marked with dates he could still recall from memory. The storm had been a freak event. A once-in-a-decade weather surge, the news anchors said. Infrastructure collapse, overwhelmed runoff systems, meteorological anomaly. But none of that explained why it felt so personal. By sunrise the next morning, news helicopters hovered above the hills. Reporters walked the roads in ponchos, trying to film the worst of the flood damage. Some tried again to approach Keanu's home. He said nothing. He sat on his porch in silence, coffee in hand, eyes heavy. Inside, the basement was nearly drained, and soon, everything he had hidden for years would come back into the light, whether he was ready or not. By mid-morning, the water had been fully drained from the basement. The pumps had done their job. What remained was silence, broken only by the occasional splash of boots against puddles and the scraping of wet debris being pushed aside. The restoration crew had set up high-powered fans and temporary lighting, their movements quiet and professional. Monica, the lead restoration specialist, stood at the top of the basement stairs reviewing her checklist. She had seen dozens of flood sites before, mansions, museums, apartments, but there was something different about this one. She could feel it before she ever stepped foot inside. Dante, the insurance adjuster, joined her with a camera slung over his shoulder and a small tablet in his hand. He had the practiced look of someone who had seen enough ruined spaces to lose the ability to be surprised. Behind them, Lila, the mold remediation expert, zipped up her jacket and adjusted her gloves. She was quiet, scanning the air for that familiar tinge of damp decay. Keanu met them at the top of the stairs. He looked rested but distant, his eyes darker than usual. He spoke softly. "There's a lot down there. Not valuable in the way people think, but it's personal, important. Please be careful with what you find." Monica nodded without hesitation. "We'll treat it with respect, we always do." Dante offered a small nod as well. "Standard inventory, damage documentation, and salvage assessment. But we're thorough." Keanu hesitated, then unlocked the basement door and stepped aside. "Thank you," he said. The three descended slowly, boots splashing in shallow puddles left behind. The air was heavy with moisture and the faint scent of mildew. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. As they reached the bottom, Monica flipped on her headlamp and swept the beam across the room. Then they froze. This wasn't what they expected. Instead of the usual mess, toppled furniture, shattered electronics, soaked carpet, they were met with a scene that didn't belong in a flood site. Along the far wall stood custom-built wooden shelving units, still intact despite the water. Some shelves were labeled in careful handwriting, 200120003, letters, art portfolio, medical, AHA, hospitals, therapy projects, film visits. Plastic storage containers lined the floor, many of them sealed, some cracked open from the water pressure. Each had laminated tags and barcodes. Some had faded under the wetness, but most were still legible. Dante stepped closer, wiping water off one container with a towel from his bag. He read the label aloud. "Correspondence, children's letters, confidential." He glanced at Monica. "Not your average memorabilia." Lila crouched near the edge of a row of boxes. She lifted a container's lid slowly and peered inside. Dozens of sealed sleeves. Each one contained a handwritten letter. Different handwriting, different colors, different languages, and they were all dated. She looked up slowly. "These have been preserved professionally," she murmured. "Acid-free sleeves, climate-stable plastic. Even the ink type matters here." Monica turned on a portable dehumidifier and adjusted her gloves. She knelt beside one of the cabinets and ran her hand along the drawer handle. It wasn't rusted. Whoever had stored these items had taken extreme care. A nearby box contained small notebooks, journals maybe, with leather bindings. A few had sticky notes attached with single names, first names only. Next to it sat a sealed envelope labeled simply, "For after I'm gone." She didn't open it. She just stared. None of them spoke for a long moment. Something about the air felt sacred now. Monica began photographing the room from every angle, careful not to disturb the placement of anything until they could catalog it properly. Her training kicked in. Itemize, assess, restore. But beneath her professional rhythm, something was stirring. She'd seen museum archives. She'd seen collector vaults. but never a personal space so precisely cared for, and certainly never one with such emotional weight. Everything looked open, controllable, and Dante, meanwhile, moved to the far end of the basement where several storage trunks had been stacked neatly along the wall. The water line had just barely kissed the tops of them. He crouched down, unlatched one, and opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of laminated drawings, childlike in color, but brilliant in expression. Rocket ships, families holding hands, simple crayon portraits of Keanu smiling next to a child's stick figure. Each one was dated, and every corner bore a handwritten name and age. Some had little notes on the back, like, "Thank you for visiting," or "You made me believe I could heal." He held one up to the light. It showed a girl in a hospital bed, smiling next to a man unmistakably drawn to resemble Keanu. In the corner, the name read, Emily, age 9, 2010. He felt the paper tremble slightly in his fingers. Not from the air, from himself. Lila stepped to his side, carrying a sealed binder she had just pulled from a waterproof crate. "These are transcripts," she said quietly. "From video calls, hospital support sessions." He wrote out entire conversations. Dante flipped a few pages. There were dates, names, locations. In many of them, the children had spoken about fear, about hope, about pain. And in Keanu's own words, carefully documented and time-stamped, were messages of reassurance, encouragement, wisdom. Monica opened a drawer nearby and found dozens of cassette tapes, each labeled with handwritten names and codes. "Children's Voices," one read. Another, "Final Call, Marcus, age 11, January 2007. She paused, gently closed the drawer. She didn't need to hear it to understand. She could feel what it was. A memory, a goodbye. Each item in the basement wasn't just a memento. It was a person, a story, a moment of someone else's life that had found its way to this place, entrusted into Keanu's care, and kept in silence for years. This wasn't an archive of ego or fame. It was something else entirely. Something sacred. Something private. Lila turned toward the center of the room. "We need to adjust how we do this," she said softly. "This isn't just salvage work. It's emotional recovery. We're not just restoring objects. We're preserving people's stories." Dante nodded. Monica looked over at the stairs. "We need more hands, quiet ones. No press, no curiosity seekers. Just people who understand what it means to handle something delicate." She reached for her radio and made a call. Meanwhile, Lila took out a notebook and began documenting the labels on every box in the corner. Not for the insurance company. Just for herself. Just so no story would go overlooked. No name would be lost to the water. She opened one final crate and found it filled with photographs. Not of Keanu, but of others. Children in hospital gowns. Teachers smiling beside science fair posters. Nurses holding hands with small patients. All of them framed in moments of pure sincerity. All of them taken by someone who clearly didn't want the spotlight, only to remember. Monica gently lifted one of the photo albums from the crate and opened it. Inside were black and white prints from the early 1990s. Keanu sitting on the floor of a children's ward, holding a paintbrush. Keanu crouching beside a boy missing hair, both of them laughing, mid-stroke. None of the pictures had captions, just dates. And always, the other person was the focus, not him. She closed the album and set it aside for careful drying. Dante stood at the center of the room now, arms folded, no longer taking photos. He was absorbing. "This isn't a collection," he said quietly. "It's a living history, like a memory vault." Lila, still kneeling at a nearby box, didn't look up when she replied. "Then we treat it like one." There was a long silence as the three of them continued their work, each now fully aware that they were standing inside something more intimate than any museum or archive could replicate. This wasn't meant to be seen. It wasn't curated for display. It was curated for meaning. And yet, the flood had brought it into the open. Keanu hadn't said much about it, just that it was personal. But now that they were here, surrounded by the depth of what had been stored in silence for years, they understood. This wasn't about property loss. This was about uncovering a hidden life, a basement full of unseen kindness. And beneath every box, every soaked page, every drawing and note, there was something they couldn't ignore. Something had been buried here, not by water, but by humility. And now that it was uncovered, none of them would ever see Keanu Reeves the same way again. The basement had begun to dry. The heavy pumps had been removed, replaced by large standing fans that pushed warm air across the concrete floor. The scent of moisture lingered, but it was fading. What remained now was silence, thick, reverent, and unspoken. Monica stood in front of a wall of sealed containers, each marked with neat hand-printed labels. She wasn't looking at them like inventory. She was reading them like titles of lost books. She reached for one marked, Letters from Children, 199920003. The container was heavy. Water had touched its base, but the top half remained sealed and intact. She carried it carefully to a dry area and laid down a clean towel before opening the latch. Inside were rows of acid-free plastic sleeves, each one holding a single envelope. Some were brightly colored, others plain white. A few were covered in stickers, others scrawled in pencil. But each one was dated, categorized, and tagged with a child's first name and age. Monica's breath caught in her throat. She pulled one out at random. The envelope read, For Mr. Reeves. From Taylor, age 10, Houston. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper covered in rounded handwriting. The child had drawn a cartoon of a dog and written about how she'd lost her father in a car crash. She said Keanu's movie had helped her stop crying at night. She said she'd started writing her own stories because of the way his character never gave up. She asked him if he ever felt sad, too. Clipped to the back of the letter was a second sheet. This one was written in calm, steady handwriting. Keanu's. He had replied, Dear Taylor, thank you for your beautiful letter. I do feel sad sometimes, but I believe that even on the hardest days, if we can find a little light, even a very small one, it can guide us. Keep writing your stories. They're already helping people, including me. With gratitude, Keanu. Monica stared at the letter for a long time. Then she reached for another, and another. Each one followed the same pattern. A letter from a child, some full of grief, others filled with excitement, some just wondering what it's like to be someone famous. Some drawings, some poems, some notes that simply said, I like your movies, and nearly every one had a reply. Lila came over and knelt beside her. What is this? Monica handed her a letter. Lila read in silence, her eyes softened. These aren't fan letters, she whispered. No, Monica said, they're lifelines. She gently flipped through more sleeves, more names, more dates. There were children from around the world. Omaha, Paris, Nairobi, Manila. Different languages, but the same raw emotion. Some of the envelopes had postmarks from war-torn regions. A few were written by parents on behalf of kids who were too sick to write on their own. Every one had been opened, read, and returned to with care. Lila found a set of letters in a separate file labeled Ongoing Correspondence, Confidential. Inside were multiple letters from the same children over the span of several years. Keanu had replied to each, continuing conversations about grief, friendship, and dreams. Some envelopes had notes clipped to them, sent school supplies, August 2001, or arranged translator call, March 2002. This wasn't just reading and responding. This was connection. sustained, intentional, and private. Dante approached quietly with a clipboard in hand, expecting to catalog the box for the insurance log. But when he saw the stack of letters spread across the towel, he stopped short. He reached down and picked one up, labeled Isaac, age 12, Johannesburg. It was written in blocky handwriting, the ink slightly smudged but still legible. Isaac described living in a small apartment with his grandmother, dreaming of becoming an engineer. He said he watched The Matrix on a bootleg VHS, and it made him believe he could create something big one day. He ended the letter with a single question: how did you believe in yourself when the world didn't? Clipped to the back was Keanu's response. Dear Isaac, I don't always believe in myself, but I try to believe in others, and that gives me strength. The way you believe in your dream, that's a kind of power too. Keep building. Keep dreaming. You never know who's waiting to walk across a bridge you create. Dante slowly put the letter down. He didn't write anything on his clipboard. He just stood still for a moment, then whispered, he answered them all. Monica opened a new container labeled Special Letters, Urgent Responses. Inside were fewer letters, each wrapped in protective foil to guard against humidity. One was barely legible, written in trembling cursive on hospital stationery. It had come from a teenager named Elena, who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. She wrote about being scared, about not wanting to die without being heard. She asked Keanu if he believed in heaven. His reply was short, handwritten in blue ink. Dear Elena, I don't know what heaven looks like, but I believe it feels like being known. And you are known. I read your letter, I hear your fear, and I'm with you in this moment. Always. K. Lila turned away, quietly wiping her eyes. They opened another box labeled Letters Returned, Follow-ups Needed. Inside were envelopes marked with Address Not Found or Recipient Moved. On each, Keanu had written a note to follow up, some dating back more than 10 years. One card had a handwritten note, Try again, sent care package already. There was evidence of persistence, compassion that didn't stop after a single response. If a letter bounced back, Keanu didn't forget it. He tried again. And again. Some boxes contained updated addresses. Some even included reports from third parties, social workers, nonprofit staff, even teachers, providing updates on the children. This was more than a hobby. It was a mission, a private one. Lila sat down beside Monica. They worked in silence, cataloging each item with fresh gloves, replacing any wet sleeves, drying the pages they could salvage. Monica pulled out a letter from a girl in Lebanon, written in both English and Arabic. It had a tiny pressed flower folded inside. It was over 20 years old, still intact. There was a reply from Keanu clipped behind it. Dear Layla, your flower made it all the way here. It smells like the sun. I hope you are safe. I hope you are still writing poems. If not, start again. Monica looked up. He remembered all of them? Lila nodded, because he saw them. She glanced at the boxes, still untouched. How many more of these are there? Monica checked the labels lining the wall. Her eyes scanned through letters 199511998. Children with illness, post-visit reflections. She answered with a whisper. He who dared to doubt it. Dante walked slowly to the far corner of the basement, where a shorter shelf stood, untouched by water thanks to its elevation. He opened a drawer labeled Handwritten Replies, Originals. Inside were stacks of paper, each written in Keanu's unmistakable handwriting. No assistants, no printed signatures, real ink, real time. He picked up one reply and held it in both hands. Dear Jonah, you asked what I would do if I had one last day on Earth. I think I'd sit beside someone who felt alone, maybe listen to the sound of rain, and I'd tell them, you mattered. That's what I'd do. And that's what I want you to know, you matter. Dante didn't speak. He didn't need to. Behind him, Monica carefully placed another sealed envelope in a drying box and gently closed the lid. In every room they had restored before, they were fixing damaged things: ceilings, carpets, walls. But here, they were uncovering meaning. Real, quiet meaning. These weren't celebrity gestures or photo apps. There were no PR handshakes, no names in the press. Keanu had built a silent life beneath the surface. A life not of fame, but of listening, of answering, of holding people in their most vulnerable moments without ever needing to be seen. The flood hadn't just damaged a basement. It had opened a door, and behind it, they were beginning to glimpse the kind of man the world had never fully known. The next box they opened was heavier than the others. The label, smudged but still readable, said, "Loss and Healing, Personal Stories." Monica and Lila looked at each other, then lifted the lid together. Inside were tightly packed folders. Each one had a child's first name, age, and a short description. Mother passed away. Sibling died of overdose. Father missing in war. PTSD after shooting. Cancer diagnosis. Leela reached for the first folder and carefully opened it. A girl named Hannah had written the letter, 11 years old. Her handwriting was uneven, the sentences raw. She described losing her mom to a sudden heart attack, how her father had become emotionally distant, how she felt invisible at school. She wrote that she had watched The Matrix with her older brother, and the scene where Neo stood back up, after being knocked down again and again, made her cry. She wrote, "I know it's a movie, but I wanted to believe I could be strong like that. I wanted to believe maybe I could still stand up." Behind the letter was Keanu's reply, written on stationery with no letterhead, just his penmanship, simple, intimate. "Dear Hannah, you already are standing. You wrote this letter. You let someone see your heart. That takes more strength than any movie character. I'm proud of you. And I believe in what comes next for you. You're not alone." Lila blinked quickly and placed the letter in a drawing tray. They moved through more folders. Each one opened a different world of heartbreak. A boy named Jordan, who'd lost both parents in a house fire. His drawing was tucked in with his letter, a rough sketch of him standing on a cloud, arms open, with two figures beside him. The caption read, "One day we'll be together again." Keanu's response was clipped behind. "Dear Jordan, when we miss people we love, our hearts stretch. That stretch hurts, but it also makes room for love that never ends. I hope you always keep drawing. You're showing others how to hope." Another folder held letters from a girl named Anika, age 9, who was recovering from self-harm. She had found one of Keanu's lesser-known roles in a film about grief, and she said it made her feel less broken. She asked how he stayed calm in his own pain. His reply was longer than the others, and part of it had been damaged by water. But the closing line was still clear. "We carry our sadness like a candle. If we protect the flame but don't hide it, it can light the way for others." Monica didn't say a word. She just kept turning pages. Some letters were decades old. Some were new enough that the ink still looked fresh. But they all followed a pattern. Children reaching out in pain, confusion, or fear, and a man answering them not with advice, but with presence, with humility, with tenderness. These weren't messages from a celebrity giving approval from a distance. They were handwritten conversations. They weren't about movies. They were about survival. And in that quiet basement, with only the hum of fans and the smell of wet paper, the restoration team began to understand the truth. This wasn't a collection of letters. It was a hidden lifeline between a quiet actor and hundreds of children who had reached out with trembling hands and been heard. Lila opened another folder, labeled Trauma Recovery Confidential. Inside was a letter written in Spanish, accompanied by a translated version on thin printer paper. A boy named Mateo, age 13, had written from a shelter in El Paso. He and his younger sister had witnessed their mother's murder. The counselor who helped them said writing letters could be a form of healing. Mateo chose to write to Keanu after seeing John Wick, not because of the action, but because of the quiet grief the character carried. "I don't know why I trust you," the letter said, "but the way your eyes looked in the movie, I saw someone else who lost something too." Clipped to it was Keanu's response, also translated. "Dear Mateo, I can't pretend to understand your pain, but I see your courage. Writing this letter, sharing your story, that's bravery most grown-ups don't have. You and your sister are not alone. Keep walking, even if the ground shakes. You have a future waiting." The folder included a follow-up note from the shelter director. It said Keanu had sent care packages to the shelter, books, sketch pads, art supplies, and had arranged for the siblings to receive trauma counseling from a local clinic, with all expenses covered, anonymous. Monica swallowed hard. This wasn't just written comfort. It was action. She looked around the basement at the hundreds of containers still untouched. How many more stories like Mateo's were stored here? How many lives had been changed without anyone outside these walls knowing? Dante stepped forward, holding a folder marked Suicide Prevention, Private. He didn't open it right away. He just stood with it in his hands, as if the weight of the folder had changed something in the room. Eventually, he sat down on a dry crate and opened the top. Inside were letters from teens who had written in their darkest moments. Some described pills, others plans. Some had already tried. A few just said, "I don't know if I'll be alive when you read this." And every single one had a reply from Keanu. No rehearsed words, no polished answers, just a voice that said, "I hear you." One letter from a girl named Tasha had 3 replies. She'd written him over the course of a year from a psychiatric facility. She said Keanu's characters made her feel strong, like maybe pain wasn't the end of her story. He wrote back after each letter, encouraging her, praising her bravery. By the final reply, he wrote, "You've survived yourself. That's the hardest thing any of us can do. Keep choosing to stay, even when it hurts, especially then." Tasha's file included a photo, added later. It showed her at a community college graduation ceremony, holding a diploma and smiling. The back of the photo read, "Still here. Thanks for helping me believe I could be." Lila placed a hand on Dante's shoulder. Neither of them said a word. The air had shifted, not because of the water, because of the truth now surfacing. These weren't fan mail responses. These were sacred exchanges. A man with global fame had spent countless nights, quietly, answering the cries of children and teens he'd never met, many of whom would never know how deeply he'd been moved by their words. It wasn't about the movies anymore. It never had been. This was about pain, about hope, and about a man who, instead of turning away from other people's suffering, stepped right into it with them. And stayed. Monica picked up one final folder before they paused for the day. Its label was faint but legible. First letter, October 1997. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, slightly yellowed, folded neatly and protected by 2 plastic sleeves. The handwriting was juvenile, slanted, and full of emotion. A boy named Eli had written to Keanu after seeing a movie that no one else in his neighborhood had even heard of. He had lost his brother to gun violence a few months earlier. Eli wrote, "I don't know if I'll be strong like you, but if you read this, maybe I won't disappear." There was no reply clipped behind it. Instead, taped gently to the back of the sleeve was a small note, in Keanu's handwriting. "I answered this one in person. No other explanation, just those 6 words." Lila stared at it for a long time. A folder that marked the beginning. A letter that might have changed the direction of everything. and a quiet note that spoke louder than any speech. The team stepped back from the boxes, taking in the scope of what they had uncovered. Dozens of names, hundreds of voices, years of compassion folded and sealed, stored without any plan for recognition or praise. They weren't just salvaging documents. They were walking through a hidden chapter of someone's life. Not the movie star, not the icon, but the man. The man who had spent decades answering the call of the wounded and never told a soul. Monica reached for a box labeled Photographs, Personal Visits. It was lighter than the others, but sealed tightly with clear tape that had yellowed over time. A watermark curved across the lower edge, but the lid and upper half of the box were dry. Monica brushed her fingers along the label. Beneath the heading, in smaller writing, someone had added, "Do not digitize." She opened the box gently. Inside were 7 large photo albums, carefully wrapped in plastic covers and tucked beside silica packets that had long since hardened. Each album had a handwritten title. No stickers, no dates printed by machines, just ink and care. Texas Hospitals 2002, 2005. Inner city schools, East Coast. Elders and care homes. International orphanages, personal trips. Unpublished, private moments. Wheelchair visits, 2010-2014. First, years 1, 9, 9, 6, 1, 9, 9. Monica selected one at random. Southwest Pediatric Centers, 19982001, and carried it to the dry folding table they had cleared for delicate work. Lila followed her silently. Together, they peeled back the outer wrap, and Monica opened the front cover with both hands. The first photo stopped them cold. Keanu was seated at the edge of a hospital bed. A young girl, bald, thin, eyes wide and lit with joy, was holding a teddy bear. She was smiling up at him, and he was smiling down, one hand gently placed over hers. There were no balloons, no doctors posing, no entourage, just a man and a child. A small drawing taped to the wall behind them showed a stick figure with long hair labeled Keanu. Underneath the photo, written in neat black ink, were the words, Allison, 7 Tucson Children's Hospital, July 1999. Lila didn't speak. She turned the page. The next photo showed Keanu under a tree, seated in a circle of teenagers on folding chairs. One girl was reading from a notebook while the others listened. Keanu leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, head tilted, listening like he was hearing something sacred. A sticky note below read, Poetry Day, Phoenix Youth Recovery Center. Every page that followed unraveled a story no one had told. He wasn't posing. He wasn't performing. In every photo, he was present. Fully, humbly present. There was one where he was sitting cross-legged on a classroom floor, surrounded by children holding up handmade drawings of rocket ships and superheroes. The caption read, Dreams Day, Albuquerque, Literacy Project, 2001. Another captured him in the corner of a nursing home kitchen, wearing a hairnet and apron, helping an elderly man stir a pot of soup. The older man's hand was frail, trembling slightly. Keanu held it steady. Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. He never wanted this to be seen. Monica nodded slowly. That's why it matters. They turned more pages. There were black and white photos from South America. Keanu holding babies wrapped in blankets. Playing soccer barefoot with children in Peru. Sitting at a handmade wooden desk beside a nun. Writing something while school kids watched. The dates spanned decades. Some of the pictures were faded. Some were in perfect condition. But all of them had the same feel. No handlers, no photographers, no press releases. Just humanity. He had gone, quietly, where he was needed, and never told the world. Monica opened the album labeled Unpublished, Private Moments. The first page held only a single photo. It showed Keanu kneeling beside a hospital bed where an older woman lay, her eyes closed, an oxygen tube gently pressed beneath her nose. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was holding her hand with both of his, forehead resting gently against her knuckles. Underneath the photo were 6 words, written in soft pencil. Mrs. Hamilton, Brooklyn, no family left. No press, no announcement, just a visit to someone the world had forgotten. Lila turned the page. The next photo caught her breath. Keanu sat in a wheelchair beside a young boy with muscular dystrophy. They were arm wrestling, both of them laughing. The photo was slightly blurry, like someone had snapped it mid-laughter. A note read, Noah, first day out of bed, Cincinnati. The team worked in quiet rhythm. Monica cataloged photo conditions and dates. Lila wiped sleeves and page protectors. Dante, who had joined them, didn't speak much. He only watched, his eyes heavy. In the next album, Wheelchair Visits 20102014, they found a cluster of photos taken in veterans' hospitals. Keanu was shown with amputees, stroke survivors, men and women in rehab units. But these weren't stiff, polite visits. They were joyful. In one, he was playing cards with 2 Vietnam vets. In another, he pushed a man's wheelchair outside to sit in the sun, both of them eating sandwiches. One vet had written, "Thank you, Johnny Utah," on his baseball cap, clearly referencing Keanu's old Point Break character. Keanu was laughing in the photo, shoulders relaxed. In another set, he was lying on the grass beside 2 children in a cancer recovery unit, coloring pictures in the dirt. The crayons were scattered, and one of the children was missing hair but smiling wide. That child had written their name on the page of the photo in blue crayon, Maya. Below it, Keanu had written in pencil, Maya, the real artist. Monica closed her eyes for a moment. He documented everything, not to show it off, to remember. Dante nodded. That's why it feels so still. These weren't events, these were encounters. At the bottom of the same box, they found an envelope marked simply, Returned visits, no cameras. Inside were loose Polaroids, faded and worn, with peeling edges. These were rawer, less protected than the rest. Some were slightly bent, but each one had a handwritten note on the back. One read, Visited after letter from grandmother, Seattle. Another, second visit, his birthday, Brooklyn. Another still, no one came for months. I went. Keanu hadn't just visited once. In many cases, he had returned. No headlines, no documentation beyond these photos. Only proof that he cared enough to come back. There was a pattern emerging. He wasn't just responding to letters. He was showing up, crossing the country, crossing borders, stepping into people's pain, quietly, gently, and leaving behind a moment worth remembering. Lila looked up from the photos and spoke with conviction. This isn't charity, this is relationship. And Monica, staring at an image of Keanu hugging an elderly woman as she wept into his shoulder, said softly, This is what love looks like when no one is watching. They opened the final album, labeled First Years 1996-1999. Inside were grainy early photographs taken with disposable cameras. Many had timestamps in the corners. Keanu looked younger, thinner, his hair longer, but the expression on his face was always the same. Gentle, present, undistracted. One photo showed him sitting in a school cafeteria with 5 children squeezed around him. They were showing him drawings on napkins and he was studying them like they were masterpieces. The caption read, Community Arts Day, East LA. Another showed him standing in front of a double-wide trailer holding a bag of groceries. A handwritten note on the back read, Del Rio, TX, house fire, came anyway. The images weren't about glamour. They weren't meant for public eyes. But in these quiet frames, something became clear. This wasn't a phase, it wasn't a project. It was a way of life. He had spent decades visiting people, children, veterans, the sick, the grieving, often in their most vulnerable states. And he had done it without a camera crew, without announcements, without telling anyone. The restoration team stood around the final album in silence. They weren't archivists anymore. They weren't documenters of loss. They were witnesses to something sacred. A man who had once been seen as a mystery was revealing himself in silence, in images never shared, in moments never broadcast. And for the first time, they saw not just what Keanu Reeves had done, but who he truly was. The far corner of the basement had remained untouched for days. Water had reached it, but hadn't fully submerged the crates beneath the collapsed shelving unit. Now that the room had dried, Monica, Lila, and Dante worked to clear the debris. Damp wood splintered as they lifted broken planks and bent brackets, revealing what had been hidden beneath. Under the wreckage were 4 large black art portfolios, sealed in plastic and labeled with dates and names. Monica lifted one carefully, brushing away flakes of drywall. The label read, Art Submissions, Youth Letters, 200420007. The others bore similar markings, stretching across years and continents. They moved the portfolios to a dry table under a floodlight. Lila unzipped the first one and slowly peeled open the protective cover. Inside was color, pages and pages of it. Drawings made in crayon, marker, pencil, and charcoal. Some were on construction paper, others on cardboard or notebook sheets. There were superheroes and rockets, family portraits, animals, fantasy worlds, and abstract patterns. Some included captions written by children. This is my dream house. Me as a space doctor. If I could fly. Every drawing was labeled with a child's name, age, city, and date. Many were laminated. Some had handwritten notes attached. Art supplies sent July 2006. Tuition covered spring semester, now attending Stanford, pre-med. Monica turned to a page filled with sketches of robotic arms. The name in the corner was Louise, age 12, Bolivia. Clipped beside it was a photo of an older teenager standing in front of a science fair exhibit. Same name, same eyes. A short note was attached. First place National Robotics Competition, 2014. Dante took a step back. These kids, they didn't just draw for him. Lila nodded. He followed them, he supported them, and he never told a soul. Lila opened the second portfolio, labeled Scholarship Candidates, Creative Pathways. It contained more than just artwork. Each drawing was paired with a profile sheet, some typed, some handwritten, listing the child's background, challenges, dreams, and updates. Many had post-its clipped to the top that read, Funded, Ongoing Mentorship, or Referred to Program. The first profile featured a girl named Amira from Detroit. Her drawing showed a giant hospital made entirely of flowers. Her note said, When I grow up, I want to make sick people feel calm before surgery. The paper beside it read, Amira, age 9, lost her mother, lives with grandmother, excellent in science, very shy. Another page showed a progress update 5 years later, accepted into pre-med program at University of Michigan. Writes poetry in her spare time, still draws. Lila traced her finger along the margin, where Keanu had written a short message in blue ink. Gentleness is a form of intelligence. She has both. Another drawing showed a boy named Samuel, age 8, from Manila. His sketch was of an enormous green lizard climbing a skyscraper. It was simple, a little chaotic, but full of motion. Attached was a follow-up form. Sent art supplies and digital tablet, 2011. Attending Arts High School. Working with animation mentor via Zoom. Dante looked over Monica's shoulder as she pulled out a folder containing children's letters that accompanied their drawings. Most were filled with phrases like, I want to show you what I made, or I hope you like it, Or can I get better if I keep practicing? Keanu had replied to nearly every one, often writing directly on the back of the drawings. His notes weren't critiques, they were affirmations. Keep your lines wild. The energy here feels alive. Art doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be yours. They weren't just encouragements. They were invitations. A quiet voice saying, I see you. At the bottom of the last portfolio was a sealed envelope, labeled Final Updates, Confirmed Outcomes. Monica opened it gently. Inside was a thick stack of printed emails, thank you notes, scanned certificates, and school acceptance letters. Some were formal, others were written in messy handwriting on lined paper. But each one echoed the same story. A child once seen had grown into an adult making a difference. A young man named Dario, once a boy who had drawn pencil sketches of rockets he called dream machines, was now in his final year of an aerospace engineering program in Italy. His letter read, Mr. Reeves, when I was 12, you sent me a telescope after I wrote to you about the stars. I found Saturn with it. Now I'm designing engines that might one day reach beyond it. Another came from a girl named Tasha. Her first drawing had been of her mother, wrapped in wings, and her letter had described losing her to illness when she was just 8. Her update said, I used to draw to escape. Now I draw to help others. I'm starting as an elementary school art teacher next month. You believed in me when no one else did. You gave me my first set of real colored pencils. Lila read a note from a woman now working as a trauma therapist. Her childhood drawing had depicted a storm cloud above a stick figure. I didn't have the words back then, the letter said, but you saw something in that scribble. You told me my pain had a voice. You helped me find it. The letters were endless. Some included graduation photos. Some came with links to websites or small businesses the children had gone on to create. One included a wedding invitation. Another sent a published book with a signed dedication. To the man who made me believe I had something worth saying. Dante, still silent, reached for the last few sheets. They were spreadsheets, neatly organized. They listed children by first name, country, the year they first sent a drawing, what assistance they'd received, supplies, scholarships, mentor pairing, and then the outcome. Graduated, accepted, still in contact, now mentoring others. He let out a slow breath. He tracked them all. Monica nodded. He didn't just answer them, he walked with them. And what stunned them wasn't just the effort or the years of follow-up. It was the impact. From a basement in Los Angeles, through drawings and words exchanged in silence, Keanu had quietly helped raise a generation of dreamers, some of whom were now building futures he might never even witness. Lila whispered. They called him to the edge of their hope, and he showed up. What started as a flooded basement filled with unknown belongings had become something else entirely. A gallery of lives changed, and a living archive of what it truly means to answer someone when they reach out in need, with more than kindness, with presence, with intention, with love that followed through. In the far right corner of the basement, tucked between two tall shelving units, the team found a gray cabinet that hadn't been cataloged yet. It was metal, heavy, and labeled with a laminated sign, Therapeutic Projects, Private Use Only. Lila opened the cabinet slowly, and the soft creak of the hinges broke the silence of the room. Inside were binders, art folders, and sealed envelopes. Most were labeled by first name, with age and diagnosis beneath. The first few files Monica pulled down were labeled Sophia, age 8, leukemia, Noah, age 11, PTSD, Jasmine, age 9, abuse recovery. Each folder contained drawings, journal entries, and long notes written by counselors and therapists. Most included typed summaries, encouraged to express grief through color, responded to story-based prompts, showed improvement after regular creative sessions. Tucked behind these were messages from Keanu, Short, compassionate notes written directly to the children, always personal, never generic. In Sophia's folder was a picture of a butterfly flying through a storm. Her counselor had written, "Sophia identifies with the butterfly. She says it's scared, but it keeps flying." Behind the drawing, Keanu had written in childlike script to match her age, "Sophia, I saw your butterfly. It's beautiful. Even in the storm, it shines. You shine too." In Noah's file, there were drawings of broken houses and dark skies. His trauma had come from witnessing domestic violence. His counselor noted that he had refused to speak for weeks until he began drawing. Keanu's note to him read, "Noah, sometimes when things break, it feels like they'll never be safe again. But your pictures help others understand. That's brave." The team worked in silence, unfolding page after page of pain, resilience, and healing. These weren't just sketches. They were therapy. They were survival. Monica opened a thick binder labeled Virtual Sessions 20, 20, 20, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Inside were transcripts, time logs, and screenshots from dozens of Zoom calls. Each page listed a child's name, their diagnosis or circumstance, and the date and time of the video session. Many included short notes from medical professionals, mood improved post-call, increased verbal expression, smiled for the first time in 3 weeks. One entry showed a transcript from a session with a girl named Marisol, age 10, who was undergoing treatment for bone cancer. She had drawn a picture of a bear holding an umbrella over a tiny mouse. On the call, she told Keanu, "The mouse is me." His response was written out. "I think the bear is you too. You're strong enough to protect others, even when it rains." That's real strength. Another call had been with a teenager named Malik, who was recovering from addiction in a youth rehab center. His drawing had been abstract, sharp angles and a single eye in the center. He told Keanu he didn't want to draw pretty things because his life wasn't pretty. Keanu replied, "Art doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be real. And what you made, it speaks." Lila flipped through more pages. In many cases, Keanu had followed up weeks later with voice messages, drawings of his own, and even poetry. One therapist wrote, he sent a video reading a short poem to the child. The child requested to hear it every night. Behind one folder was an envelope marked Guided Interventions. It included printed emails and coordination notes with child psychologists, pediatric oncologists, and trauma counselors. Keanu hadn't been acting alone. He'd been working within structured, medically informed therapy models. His involvement wasn't superficial. It was intentional, informed, responsible. Dante looked at a file labeled Ethan, age 14, self-harm. Inside was a series of charcoal sketches showing shadows and fractured shapes. Each drawing was dated. At the end of the file, there was one image in bright color, a rising sun over water. It was the last drawing. Keanu's note read, "Ethan, the sun you drew, I've never forgotten it. It reminded me that even the quietest light can warm the whole sky." Lila whispered. He gave them more than answers. He gave them meaning. At the bottom of the cabinet, Monica found a folder marked Ongoing Support, Confidential. Inside were handwritten letters and printed emails. Not from children this time, but from doctors, school counselors, therapists, and parents. It was immediately clear that this wasn't just record-keeping. These were updates, expressions of gratitude, continued communication with the person who had shown up long after the initial gesture had faded. One letter came from a pediatric oncologist in Chicago. "Mr. Reeves," it began, "I want you to know that the video you recorded for Lily, where you simply told her, 'I'm proud of you for fighting,' became a turning point in her treatment. She watched it every night before bed. Her anxiety decreased, her vitals stabilized. She began eating again. The nurses were stunned. We hadn't seen her smile in weeks. Another came from a counselor in a middle school in Kansas. "You probably don't remember Jamal," the note read, "but the day your drawing arrived, he ran around the classroom yelling, 'I'm gonna be an artist! Keanu said so!'" We've kept his drawing framed on the wall. He hasn't missed a day of school since. There were letters from mothers and fathers, too. One wrote, "My son passed away last spring. I just wanted you to know that in his final days it wasn't the medication or the machines that brought him peace. It was the moment you drew a cartoon dog with him over Zoom. He laughed so hard we cried." Lila read each one slowly, then placed it on the table like it was a sacred object. A few of the envelopes had been sealed with wax. Others were folded simply. None were dramatic. All were deeply personal. Another folder was labeled "Final Drawings." Inside were scans of children's last pieces of art, some colorful, others haunting. A sunset drawn in pastels, a smiling lion, a little boy holding hands with a figure labeled Keanu. Some had dates, a few had notes on the back. "He wanted you to have this," or "She finished this the day before she passed." One letter came from a chaplain at a children's hospice. "We don't often see miracles here," he wrote, "but we saw one when you called Marcus. You made his last day feel like a beginning." Monica looked up from the growing pile and whispered, "This isn't outreach, this is spiritual care." Dante nodded slowly. "This isn't just generosity, it's devotion." What they had found wasn't a record of kind gestures. It was a carefully woven web of emotional investment that reached across states, countries, and years. Keanu hadn't just dropped into these lives. He had stayed. He had followed up. He had returned. Over and over again. In a basement once filled with water, they had uncovered a map, one drawn not in lines or coordinates, but in compassion, commitment, and quiet presence. And what they saw now was undeniable. This wasn't celebrity kindness. This was healing drawn by hand, one child at a time. Dante had just finished moving aside a warped cabinet when he noticed something different in the far corner of the basement. It wasn't soggy like everything else. It was bolted low to the foundation, tucked beneath a beam, and surprisingly intact. A waterproof metal case, military grade from the looks of it. No dust, no watermarks, no signs of corrosion. Just a silent gray box that looked too purposeful to ignore. He called for Lila and Monica. "This one wasn't touched," he said quietly, brushing debris from the latch. It clicked open with effort, the hinges stiff but unbroken. Inside, everything was sealed in foam, each item wrapped in waterproof sleeves or containers. Dozens of flash drives, external hard drives, and DVDs lay neatly labeled in rows. There were even a few mini DV tapes, stacked like forgotten relics. On each piece was a handwritten note. Names, locations, sometimes just a date, but all in the same deliberate penmanship. Lila gently lifted one drive. It read, "Children's Hospital Calls, West Coast 200-52011. Another said, "Amir, Diary Series." Others had vague but heartfelt labels. Messages of hope. Messages of hope. They made it. They carefully placed the contents on a dry table. Lila pulled out her laptop and connected a media reader. For a few seconds, the screen was black. Then a folder popped open, neatly organized by year and name. She clicked the first video. A boy sat in a hospital bed, tubes in his arms but grinning from ear to ear. "Hi, Keanu," he said. "It's me, Eddie from Atlanta. Remember the Iron Man sketch you sent? I showed it to my doctor, and he put it on the fridge in the break room. Now everyone on the floor knows you're my friend." Next was a girl in a wheelchair, playing piano. The lighting was soft, her fingers slightly trembling. "You told me music can heal things doctors can't. So I practiced, even when I didn't feel like it. This is for you." Each video felt like a private moment. None of it was polished, no PR gloss, no staged backdrops. Just kids being kids, holding up drawings, waving through screens, thanking Keanu not as a movie star, but as someone who had shown up. Then came a longer file labeled Amir 201322018. Lila clicked it. A teenage boy appeared, seated on a hospital rooftop. He spoke directly to the camera. "Hey man, they told me it came back," Amir said softly. "But I'm not scared. I remember when you told me I was more than the sickness. I held on to that. Every single day. So, this is just round 2. The next clip showed Amir at home, bald but smiling. "Hair's gone, but my courage isn't. You said I was a warrior, right?" There were dozens more like it. Kids who had written, called, or sent videos. Many were updates. Some were farewells. But most were victories. Quiet, personal testaments of resilience, sparked by a man who simply cared enough to listen. Monica sat back slowly, her eyes brimming as another video loaded. This one featured a boy named Leo from Minnesota. He was maybe 12, seated in a cluttered bedroom with comic books stacked behind him. A cast covered one leg, but his voice was energetic. "You told me my art looked like something from Marvel," he said, holding up a sketchpad. "So I drew this for you. It's a superhero called the Listener. His power is hearing people when no one else does. I made him for you." The screen faded to black before another clip opened. This time it was a split-screen Zoom call. On one side, a frail girl lay on a couch, her head wrapped in a scarf. On the other, Keanu's face appeared. Calm, warm, patient. "Hey, Riley," he said gently. "I got your poem. It moved me, truly. You said you feel invisible, but I see you. I see your courage." She smiled through tears, whispering, "Thank you for saying that. I really needed someone to see me." Dante looked away, his throat tight. He wasn't a man who cried easily, but this was overwhelming. These weren't celebrity shout-outs or one-time surprises. These were real relationships, often spanning months or even years. There were no sponsors, no TV crews, no foundations seeking publicity. Just Keanu. One man, one heart, one voice making a difference. Anything he wanted this one time, one heart was plugged into the disc. Lila scrolled through more folders, audio only, transcripts, follow-ups, weddings. Wedding? She opened one labeled Sasha and Eli, June 2017. A video popped up of a young couple standing under a gazebo, a backyard wedding, small and joyful. After the ceremony, they held up a framed letter. The bride looked into the camera and said, "Keanu, if you're watching this happened because you believed in us. When Eli was sick and I had no idea what to do, your letters kept him going. You taught us to dream past the pain. Thank you for being part of our story." Below the video was a PDF. Lila clicked it. It was a transcript of Keanu's response, printed and preserved. It read, "Dear Sasha and Eli, love that endures pain is the truest kind. I may not be at your wedding in person, but I'm cheering from afar. I'm proud of you both. Never forget, you matter. Your story matters." Silence filled the room. Again, Monica whispered, "He kept all of this?" Not just the videos, the replies, the updates, the drawings, the transcripts. Every file was methodically saved, organized, cared for. Like a digital scrapbook of compassion. It wasn't just about what the children said. It was how Keanu had responded. Not as an icon, as a friend. Dante leaned forward and said quietly, This isn't a collection of fan mail. It's a lifeline." And every piece of it had been locked away beneath his home, protected from the world. Until now. As the team continued exploring the contents of the waterproof cabinet, they came across one more folder. This one labeled Amir, Full Archive. It held dozens of video files spanning nearly 5 years. The first clip opened with a boy about 8 years old. Bald from treatment, he sat in a hospital chair with a blanket up to his chest. "Hi, Keanu," he said with a grin. "They said I might get to talk to you today." "That would be the coolest thing ever." The next video showed a call. Keanu appeared on screen, waving gently. "Hi, Amir," Keanu said. "I read your letter. I saw the rocket you drew. You're amazing. How are you holding up today?" "I'm a little scared," Amir admitted. "That's okay," Keanu replied. "Being scared doesn't make you weak, it means you're still fighting, and that makes you a warrior." The video paused, then another played. Amir, older now, was walking with a cane through a backyard. "3 years cancer-free," he said proudly. "Keanu, I'm going to space camp next summer, just like we talked about. I never stopped drawing rockets." There were messages on holidays, updates after doctor visits, even a video of Amir holding up an acceptance letter to a science program. "You told me to keep going, so I did." By the time the last video played, Amir was 17. He stood in a workshop surrounded by sketches and models. "I want to build things that help people, like you helped me. I know you'll probably never show these videos to anyone, but I just want you to know, you saved my life." Lila closed the laptop gently and pushed it aside. No one spoke for a long time. The walls of the basement still smelled of mildew and mud. A box nearby still dripped water onto the floor. But in the middle of all that ruin, something sacred had been preserved. It was more than sentiment. It was history. Proof that quiet kindness could echo louder than fame ever could. Dante finally broke the silence. "I think this is the most important thing I've ever uncovered in my career." Monica nodded slowly. "It's like we've walked into someone's heart." They looked at each other, each feeling the same invisible weight. Not guilt, not sadness, but awe. Keanu had never spoken about this, never posted, never filmed himself for attention. He hadn't built a nonprofit. He had built something far more fragile and far more powerful, a hidden sanctuary of healing, and it had taken a flood to uncover it. Lila reached for the flash drives, carefully placing them in fresh containers. "We need to keep this safe, every single one," Dante agreed. "This isn't just evidence of generosity. It's a record of how one man refused to be a bystander." And somewhere, above the flooded basement, Keanu Reeves sat quietly, unaware that the truth he had so gently protected was now being seen. For the very first time. The morning sunlight filtered through the cracked basement window, catching on the silver edges of a folder labeled simply, "Alumni." Monica pulled it from the shelf with care, brushing away mud that had dried like old paint. The folder wasn't flashy, it was tucked behind rows of preserved letters and journals, almost as an afterthought. But when she opened it, a flood of stories spilled out, each one more powerful than the last. There were envelopes marked with handwritten notes. First job, San Diego, graduation, Harvard, wedding photo, Texas. Inside were photos, thank you letters, printed emails, even baby announcements. Each name matched someone they'd already seen. Children who had once sent crayon drawings, nervous video messages, or scribbled letters asking for hope. Now they were grown, thriving. Dante lifted one photo carefully. A young woman in a cap and gown stood beside a college sign that read, UCLA, School of Nursing. On the back was written, "You told me I was strong enough to save others. I believed you. Class of 2023. Love, M." Another message came with a wedding invitation from a couple who had first bonded as childhood cancer survivors. They'd both been part of Keanu's correspondence circle. "You reminded us love is worth fighting for," the note read. You are the reason we made it through the darkest years." Lila sorted through a small pile of letters tied together with twine. One had smudged ink where someone had clearly cried while writing. It began, "When I was 13, I was sure the world didn't need me. Then your letter arrived." The writer had included a photo of herself standing proudly in front of a counseling center in Michigan. She was now a licensed therapist. She had dedicated her career to helping teenagers survive what she once faced alone. Monica turned away, her eyes brimming with tears. "He never told anyone," she whispered. "He never wanted thanks." She was holding a laminated letter that said, "You asked me once to do one thing. Pass it forward." So I did. I've helped 30 kids get into school. I told them about the man who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Lila glanced at Monica, her voice hushed. "His legacy isn't here," she said, tapping the basement wall. "It's out there. In them." Dante walked over to a waterproof box tucked behind some shelving. It wasn't labeled, just sealed tight with industrial tape. With careful fingers, he peeled it open and found an accordion file full of updates from people now scattered across the world. Tucked into the folds were color prints, typed updates, and even hand-drawn maps. On one side was a sticky note that read, "Kept in touch. Check every 2 years." One folder stood out. It belonged to a boy named Amir, now Dr. Amir Qureshi. Inside was a photo of him standing in a white coat outside a children's hospital in Toronto. A typed letter explained how Amir, once a leukemia patient, too weak to leave bed, had found strength in Keanu's letters. They had written back and forth for years. Amir had included a scanned page from one of those letters. "You matter. Don't let pain define your path. You're not alone." Next to Amir's letter was a thank you card from a girl named Sophia, now a mechanical engineer. Her first note to Keanu had been a child's sketch of a broken robot. Keanu had replied with a model kit and a message, "Keep building." She had. Now she was working for a major robotics company. The card read, "Every machine I touch, I think of that first kit." There were dozens more like them. A boy who became a social worker, a girl who grew up to open an animal shelter, a young man who taught art in underfunded schools. Every one of them had written the same sentiment in their own words. Keanu believed in them before anyone else did. Monica found a thick envelope labeled "Returned Letters." It was filled with correspondence that had been sent back undelivered. Some had crossed out addresses or tragic notes like "deceased" scrawled across the front. But Keanu had kept them anyway. On the outside of the envelope in his handwriting were the words, "Not forgotten." Lila sat down on a nearby step, overwhelmed. "He didn't just send hope," she said softly. "He invested in it. He remembered their names, their stories, their dreams." Monica nodded. "And he never once told the world?" The weight of that silence spoke louder than any headline ever could. In a final folder labeled simply "Pay It Forward," the team found notes from former recipients who had begun helping others, just as Keanu had helped them. One was a letter from a man named Eli, now a paramedic in New Mexico. He had grown up in a rough neighborhood and had once written to Keanu during a dark period. The folder included a photo of Eli holding a rescued child after a fire, with a note clipped to the back. "I do this because someone once reminded me that I met." Another entry was a printout of a blog written by a woman named Natalie. She had been hospitalized with depression at 16 and had exchanged letters with Keanu for over a year. She wrote about how his words gave her the strength to survive high school and find purpose. She now ran a support group for teens dealing with mental health challenges. In the final line of her blog, she had written, "He asked for no praise, only that I turn pain into light for someone else. So I try, every day." Monica gently placed the folder down and covered her face. Her shoulders shook quietly. "I thought I knew what kindness looked like," she whispered. But this is something else entirely. Dante stood near the edge of the room, staring at the now dried wall, still stained with water lines. He wasn't saving souvenirs, he said. He was saving people, and he never needed the credit. Lila slowly nodded, her eyes scanning the names on the letters, the updates, the echoes of lives touched. This entire basement, it's not storage, it's a legacy. They had come expecting water damage and ruined valuables. Instead, they had walked into a sanctuary of human connection, a place built not from bricks and beams, but from belief and care. A space that held the proof of lives transformed, not by fame or fortune, but by the steady presence of one man who simply listened, answered, and remembered. As they packed the materials to preserve them properly, none of them spoke much. There was a sacredness to the work now. Every paper, every photo, every reply had become more than a relic. It was a heartbeat, still echoing in the silence. In the soft morning light filtering through the dusty basement window, Monica carefully opened a folder labeled Legacy Updates 2022. Inside were a dozen neatly organized printouts and photographs. These weren't just thank you notes, they were updates from now grown children who had taken the compassion they once received and transformed it into action. The first file was about a woman named April. She had been one of the teenagers who sent Keanu a letter during a difficult year in foster care. His handwritten reply had arrived just days before she was planning to drop out of school. In the letter he'd written, "You may not feel seen right now, but your light is still shining. Some lights are just quiet." That single phrase became her anchor. Years later, April earned her degree in education and became a high school counselor. But she didn't stop there. Taped beside her letter was a photo of a group of young women standing in a circle, each wearing a pin that read Quiet Lights. April had founded a mentorship organization under the same name. It now operated in 5 states, helping teenage girls overcome trauma, isolation, and self-doubt. Keanu's words had become a movement. Lila let out a slow breath as she read through the materials. "He didn't just help them survive," she murmured. "He helped them create something bigger than themselves." Next came a folder with a story from a man named Jamal. His letter to Keanu as a boy had included a drawing of a firefighter rescuing a child from a burning house. At the time, his father had just died in a house fire, and he was drowning in grief. Keanu's response came within 2 weeks. He had enclosed a sketch of the same scene, drawn in his own hand, with the message, "Your courage is in your art. Don't let it go." Jamal kept that sketch all through high school. Today, he worked full-time as a trauma counselor for fire survivors and ran an after-school art program for children of first responders. The impact wasn't just personal anymore. Keanu's quiet kindness had turned grief into guidance. And now, Jamal was doing the same for others. Dante reached into another archival box and retrieved a small binder labeled Scholarship Updates. Inside were laminated letters and graduation photos. Many had handwritten annotations in the margins. One note read, "Met her in 2005. Sent drawing paper, applied for scholarship in 2010. Accepted to Yale, 2012. The photo attached was of a young woman in a cap and gown, standing with her parents, tears in their eyes. Another letter stood out. It was from a man named Luis, who had once lived in a shelter with his single mother. He wrote to Keanu when he was 12, after seeing The Matrix, and shared how the movie helped him believe he could break free from his situation. Keanu's reply had been a short note, but powerful. "The world may feel like a cage, but your mind is already free. Follow that." Luis had taken those words literally. After years of struggle, he earned a degree in social work and opened a support center for homeless teens in San Diego. His center served over 200 youth per year. In the corner of one photo, a mural was visible, painted with words in bold lettering, "Already free." Monica pressed a hand over her mouth, her eyes misting again. These weren't just kind gestures. They were seeds that had grown into entire forests of change. Every file they opened led to more ripples, more names, more actions. The team began to realize the scale of what had happened, how one man's quiet replies had ignited entire lifetimes of purpose. The most emotional discovery came when Lila opened a brown envelope labeled Generations. It contained letters not from the original children, but from their own kids. Some were young, writing in crayon. Others were teenagers, telling Keanu how their mom or dad always talked about him as the man who listened. One letter from a 12-year-old boy read, "My mom said you were the reason she went to college. Now she's helping other kids. I want to be like her and like you." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of legacy. These weren't just thank yous. They were proof that compassion, when passed down, becomes unstoppable. Keanu had never asked for credit, and yet his influence had already outlived him. By late afternoon, the restoration team stood silently around a table, the Generations folder still open before them. The sun filtered through the broken basement window, casting a warm glow over the scattered documents, as if the light itself was paying tribute to what they had uncovered. Monica gently held up a photograph, a faded Polaroid of a young girl holding a violin. Written on the back were the words, "She couldn't afford lessons, so I sent her my favorite bow. Played her first recital in 2011. Attached was a newer photo of the same girl, now grown, standing in a concert hall. The caption read, "First Chair, Boston Symphony Orchestra." None of this had ever been in the news. There had been no publicity, no social media posts, no charity galas, just decades of quiet impact. One letter, one gesture, one life at a time. It was the kind of legacy that couldn't be measured by fame or awards. It was a legacy written in the hearts of those who'd been seen, heard, and believed in when no one else had noticed them. And now some of those same people were raising families, mentoring children, starting community gardens, teaching underserved students, and creating safe havens for those in crisis. One woman had opened a domestic violence shelter. Another ran art therapy sessions for children of incarcerated parents. A third had written a best-selling memoir about resilience. And in the acknowledgments, she thanked Keanu Reeves, simply as the stranger who reminded me I mattered. It was Dante who finally broke the silence. He turned to the others and said, "He never told anyone. He never needed to." Monica nodded. This wasn't about him. It was about all of them. Lila slowly closed the final binder, her voice soft. "He never asked for a return. But they gave it anyway, and then gave it again." What they had witnessed wasn't just an archive. It was a living ecosystem of hope and healing, spanning continents, generations, and hearts. Keanu's handwritten words had become threads that wove people together, many of whom would never know each other's names, but all of them carried something forward. A quiet light. And for the team standing in that water-damaged basement, it no longer felt like a cleanup job. It felt like witnessing history. As the last of the warped furniture was cleared from the far corner of the basement, Monica noticed something wedged beneath a half-collapsed filing drawer. It was dark, heavy, and wrapped in an old towel. She gently tugged it free, revealing a leather-bound journal, swollen slightly from moisture but miraculously intact. Its cover was scuffed and the edges of the pages were frayed, but when she opened it, the writing was still legible. Inked in neat cursive across the first page were 5 simple words. "If this ever gets found." They didn't speak for a moment. Then Dante stepped forward, and Monica handed it to him, her hands trembling. He opened to the second page and began reading aloud, slowly, almost reverently. March 9, 2002. "Sometimes I feel like the grief will drown me. It's a quiet thing, but it lingers. I lost someone again today, not to death, but to time. I wonder if the kids I've written to remember me. I don't need them to. I just want them to know they mattered. They reminded me I still did. Page after page, the journal revealed a side of Keanu they hadn't seen, even after uncovering hundreds of letters and photos. These were his private thoughts, never meant for press or public praise, just raw emotion written into the night. That's Anos. What's yours? There were poems, written in shaky lines about loneliness and light. There were reflections on long drives to hospitals, where he'd sometimes sit in parking lots crying before walking in with a smile. One entry read, "I never know what to say, but I show up. Sometimes that's all I have, but maybe it's enough." Lila leaned in, brushing a tear away. This isn't a celebrity. This is someone who hurts with others. There was no mention of awards, box office records, or fame. Instead, the journal focused on moments that never made headlines. A boy named Jeremy who loved tigers and wanted to be a zookeeper. A teenage girl named Ray who painted birds and gave him one of her canvases before she passed away. He had written about her in 3 separate entries, each one more tender than the last. The journal didn't ask to be found, but now that it had been, it felt sacred. Dante continued reading, his voice softer now, more reverent with each entry. April 16, 2008. I stayed up all night replying to letters. My hand hurt from writing, but my heart didn't. One boy asked if I thought angels had backpacks. I told him maybe they carried crayons instead of swords. He sent me a drawing the next week of an angel coloring the sky. The restoration team gathered quietly around him, each feeling the same invisible weight settle into their chest. This wasn't just a diary. It was a window into the soul of a man who had endured pain and turned it into something luminous. Page after page offered no bitterness, only compassion. The ink bled slightly in places where water had crept in, but the meaning remained. December 1, 2013. I went to a hospital in Montana. No cameras, no entourage. A nurse told me the boy hadn't spoken in a week. I sat down beside him and asked about dinosaurs. He looked at me and whispered, "T-Rex." That was all. But that was everything. Lila picked up a small flashlight and scanned the edges of the page, careful not to damage the delicate binding. She noticed something tucked inside. 2 loose photos. One showed Keanu sitting on a floor with a group of children, paint smudged on his hands, surrounded by half-finished art projects. The other was a close-up of a handwritten card from a child named Mikey. "Thank you for not forgetting me, even when the world did." The next few entries in the journal grew even more personal. Sometimes I still hear my sister's voice. When I visit these kids, I feel close to her again. I see her in their faces. I think that's why I keep doing this. She wouldn't have wanted me to just move on. She'd want me to pass it forward. Monica covered her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. None of them had expected this flood of emotion. They had come to do cleanup, insurance assessments, mold inspections, yet here they stood, holding the emotional blueprint of a man who had rebuilt parts of himself by helping others heal. Keanu hadn't been saving these memories for posterity. He had been preserving them for his own soul. Near the back of the journal, Monica discovered a folded piece of paper tucked into the binding. It was written on different stationery than the others, lined with a child's doodles and ink hearts around the border. Keanu had written across it in large letters, "The letter that saved me." The note inside was from a girl named Rachel, age 12. "Dear Mr. Reeves, I don't have a dad. He left before I was born. But I saw you in that movie where you lost everything and still kept being kind. So I try to be kind too. Yesterday, I gave my lunch to a new girl who had no food. My teacher smiled at me. I think you'd be proud. Love, Rachel." On the opposite page, Keanu had written in his journal, "That day, I wanted to disappear. Grief has corners, and I'd turned into one. Then, this letter arrived. Rachel, if you're still out there. I hope you became the woman you dreamed of. You reminded me why I stay, why I fight for tomorrow." Dante stepped back, wiping his eyes. The silence in the room wasn't hollow. It pulsed with reverence. They weren't just discovering facts about Keanu's life. They were standing inside the beating heart of his legacy, a legacy few had ever seen because he never showed it. Lila looked toward the stairs and whispered, "He didn't do this for headlines. He did this to heal." As the team carefully closed the journal and placed it inside a climate-controlled case for preservation, Monica paused. She took one last look at the worn leather, now faded at the edges. This wasn't a celebrity diary. It wasn't a branding exercise or vanity archive. It was a confession. It was a prayer. It was the untold truth of a man who carried not just the weight of his own past, but pieces of everyone else's too. And he carried it quietly. Later, when Keanu returned downstairs, he saw the journal resting gently in the case. He didn't say anything. He only nodded once, eyes misted, then turned to check on the rest of the basement. Because for him, this wasn't about being remembered. It was about making sure others never felt forgotten. Dante was clearing out the last corner of the basement when he noticed a small drawer behind the shelving. It was metal, locked, and marked only by a single white label, "In case I'm gone." He hesitated before calling the others over. Lila found a rusted key in a nearby tray and slowly turned it in the lock. The drawer creaked open, revealing a slim, tan folder. Inside, there was a single page, folded into thirds, with Keanu's handwriting across the front. "Please read, only if I'm no longer here." No one spoke. The air grew still. Monica, with trembling hands, unfolded the letter and began to read. Her voice barely carried across the quiet space. "If you're reading this, then I'm not around anymore. I hope this wasn't found too soon. I wrote this for peace, not mine, but maybe yours. I never wanted the world to know everything. Not about the visits, not the letters, not the donations. That was the point. Giving anonymously freed me from the fear of being seen for the wrong reasons. It reminded me that doing good didn't need a camera." The letter was handwritten, neat but faded in spots where the ink had run. Some words were underlined. Others had smudges, as if his hand had trembled, or as if tears had fallen onto the page. My fear was never dying. It was dying before I did enough. Not with my career, but with my life. I was given more than I deserved. Fame, wealth, time, and I never wanted to waste it. They paused. Monica swallowed hard before continuing. "Some of the children I wrote to, I never met them. Some never wrote back. But I thought of them often. I imagined what they'd grow up to be. A nurse, a father, a woman standing in front of a class telling kids they matter. I prayed that they'd hold someone someday, that they'd give comfort the way I tried to." The letter didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like a confession, a hope placed gently into the hands of strangers. There were more words to come, but already the team felt the weight of something sacred. Lila leaned forward, gently brushing her fingers over the page, as if afraid even air might erase the ink. Monica continued reading, slower now. "You may think what I did was noble, but I don't. I did it because I needed to. I lost people too early. My daughter, my best friends, my family. There were days I didn't want to speak to anyone. But every time I opened a letter from a child who was suffering, I found a piece of my own heart inside theirs. That pain, it connected us. That hope, it saved me, maybe more than I saved them." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I didn't build foundations or cut ribbons at charity galas. I sent art supplies in unmarked boxes. I paid for surgeries without ever putting my name on the hospital list. I answered midnight emails from kids afraid to go to sleep because of nightmares. I never wanted them to feel alone. The room had fallen into a kind of reverent silence. No one checked their phones. No one moved. The soft dripping of water from a cracked pipe was the only sound between sentences. There's a phrase I used in a letter once, quiet lights. It meant people who shine in ways no one sees. I never told anyone, but that's how I wanted to live, to be a quiet light. If you're holding this letter, maybe you are too. Maybe you're someone who noticed the little things. Someone who chose to care. Dante wiped at his eyes with the back of his wrist, pretending it was dust. The letter continued. I won't ask for anything. I've already been given more than I can repay. But if this letter outlives me, I hope it reminds someone that even the smallest gesture, a reply, a sketch, a visit, can ripple far beyond what you ever see. It was personal, not meant for headlines or interviews. Keanu had poured his private truth onto a page and locked it away, never intending for applause. And yet here it was, found in the aftermath of water damage and silence, speaking louder than any press conference ever could. The final lines of the letter were the ones that lingered in their minds long after the paper was carefully sealed in a dry preservation pouch. If I've gone, don't mourn me with silence. Do something kind. That's the only way I'll know I mattered. If even one person holds a child's hand, listens to someone who's breaking, or forgives when it's hard, I'll still be here. Monica's hand trembled as she zipped the pouch closed. We can't just leave this in storage, she whispered. It needs to be protected and remembered. Lila nodded, her voice low. It's more than a letter. It's a map, a legacy, a human blueprint. They gathered around the makeshift table they had set up, laying the letter beside the journal, the art folders, the videos, and the photographs. Together, these fragments formed a picture of a man the world thought they knew. A movie star, an action hero, a celebrity. But the person revealed here wasn't performing. He was showing up, quietly, again and again, in places no cameras reached. Dante stood a little back, his gaze lingering on the words, "In case I'm gone." He'd seen hundreds of properties damaged beyond recognition. But this was different. The loss here wasn't structural. It was almost spiritual. No statue, no award, he muttered. Just a letter and a hope. Lila took a breath. And somehow, that's more powerful than anything he's ever said on screen. They sealed the folder with care and placed it in a climate-controlled container, separate from the other files. Not because it was more important, but because it felt sacred. The basement still smelled of damp wood and mildew, but something had shifted. The atmosphere no longer felt like a disaster zone. It felt like hallowed ground. And as they prepared to climb the stairs back into daylight, Monica turned back, one last time. I don't think this was meant to be found, she said. But maybe it was meant to be carried. The others didn't respond. They didn't have to. Because in that moment, all three of them understood. This wasn't the end of a cleanup. It was the beginning of a responsibility. Just when the crew thought they had uncovered everything, something unusual caught Dante's eye. A slight indentation in the wall behind the damaged shelving unit didn't match the original blueprint. He tapped the surface. It echoed hollow. Monica joined him with a flashlight. The beam revealed a jagged seam, partially obscured by debris. It wasn't drywall. It was the back of a wooden panel, buckled slightly from the water damage. With cautious hands and slow movements, Dante peeled away the paneling. Dust choked the air, and behind the wreckage they found a sealed steel safe embedded into the wall. No labels, no instructions, just a combination dial caked in grime. Lila looked over his shoulder and muttered, "This feels different." The atmosphere shifted. For hours they had been opening boxes, handling papers, and uncovering emotional history. But this felt like something deliberately hidden. It took them nearly 20 minutes to clean the dial and manipulate the mechanism. Monica listened closely as Dante turned the wheel with the patience of a locksmith. A soft click. The heavy door creaked open. Inside were tightly packed items wrapped in protective cloth. One by one, they gently removed them. A stack of VHS tapes, several 8x film reels, and a few Super 16 film cans. Every label was handwritten. Quito 1987, Chiang Mai 1989, Davao City 1990. Monica's breath caught. These are from before he was anyone. Lila sat cross-legged and opened one of the reels. Inside, a still photograph was tucked beneath the film strip. It showed a young Keanu, no older than 23, sitting barefoot on a concrete floor, surrounded by laughing children. He wasn't posing. He was just there, hammer in hand, building a wooden frame with one of the boys. The footage, they realized, was much older than anything they'd seen in the rest of the archive. This wasn't part of a public campaign. This wasn't a documentary. There were no cameramen, no press badges, no microphones in sight. These were homemade recordings, grainy, quiet, raw. Dante found a small label tucked beneath one tape. He read, "Don't show these unless the world forgets why stories matter." They moved carefully now, reverent. The team gathered around an old portable projector they had cleaned the day before, not sure if it would still work. Monica threaded one of the reels, labeled Chiang Mai 1989, into the machine. The projector hummed weakly, then flickered to life. Light danced across the far wall, and a shaky image came into focus. The screen showed Keanu in a humid, open-air classroom in northern Thailand. He wasn't speaking, he was listening. A girl with a missing tooth read aloud from a page, stumbling through the English words, and Keanu clapped with genuine delight when she finished. Then the footage cut to another moment. He was in a kitchen, washing dishes with the staff. Not for the camera, just because he could. Lila wiped her eyes as the film played on, showing Keanu helping to build a roof with bamboo, handing out notebooks, sitting in a circle with barefoot kids drawing in the dirt. At one point, a child crawled into his lap and fell asleep. The scene held for almost 30 seconds, no movement, just Keanu holding the child, his eyes closed, his face calm. There were no scripts, no lines, just a man being present. The team sat in complete silence. These weren't visits staged for attention or self-promotion. These were moments he never wanted anyone to know about. Decades before social media. Decades before the world decided he was the internet's favorite celebrity. In another tape labeled Davao City 1990, Keanu was teaching a small group of teenagers how to stage a dramatic scene. He laughed with them, pantomimed fight choreography using sticks, and encouraged one shy boy until he found the courage to perform in front of his friends. On the back of the label, someone had written, "Marco passed his theater exam, 1994. Monica whispered. He kept track of them all. Dante nodded, his voice low, because to him, this was the real performance. And they understood. What lay in that safe wasn't just film. It was a window into who Keanu was, long before the world put a spotlight on him, before the fame, before the loss, before the legend. He had already chosen who he wanted to be. The last reel was labeled in faded marker, Quito, 1991, final day. It showed Keanu walking down a dirt road beside a small boy holding his hand. The boy looked no more than 6. He had a patched shirt and bare feet, but a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Keanu crouched beside him, pointing to the mountains in the distance. No sound played, but you could feel the conversation. You could feel the stillness of that bond. Then the boy turned and hugged Keanu tightly. Keanu lifted him, held him close for a long time, then carried him the rest of the way. When the reel ended, the team didn't speak. There was no need. Each of them sat there, processing the sheer scale of what they had uncovered, not just the photos, letters, journals, or safe, but the truth behind it all. The Keanu the world thought they knew was only a glimpse. The man who made audiences cheer on the big screen had quietly been changing lives off it, silently, consistently, and without asking for anything in return. These weren't side projects or PR gestures. They were a lifelong mission, a way of being. Lila finally stood and said, "We can't keep this hidden." Monica nodded. "But we can't exploit it either." So, they agreed. The footage would be carefully digitized and archived, with names protected where possible. A small exhibit would be created, not for profit, not for spectacle, but to inspire. To remind people that even in a world obsessed with fame, there are still those who choose to give without applause. They placed the reels back into the safe, but with new reverence. They weren't relics. They were evidence. Evidence that true greatness often hides in small acts, that the most important stories are the ones that never make headlines. Dante took one last look at the image burned into his mind. Keanu walking with that child into the misty horizon of Quito. A quiet figure, hand in hand with hope. Then he closed the safe. And in that moment, they all understood something that words couldn't quite hold. The real Keanu had never lived in the mansion above them. He had always lived in the hearts of those who needed him most. A week had passed since the last reel was sealed away. The restoration team had continued their work carefully, respectfully. Every item that could be dried was gently treated. Each folder was relabeled. Art was scanned and protected. The journal was placed in a humidity-controlled container. They had even built temporary shelving from salvaged wood, giving structure to what had once been a pile of waterlogged ruin, and now the quiet hum of the dehumidifiers was replaced by something else. Footsteps on the stairs. Keanu had returned. He stepped into the basement slowly, his boots pressing gently into the plywood walkway they'd laid down to keep the floor from crumbling beneath their weight. His eyes moved across the room. Every corner held a memory. Every surface, a piece of someone else's heart. The air was still damp, but warmer than before. Sunlight filtered faintly through a tarp-covered window. The crew stood together near the center of the room. Dante, Monica, Lila, and two others who had stayed on. No one spoke at first. Then Keanu offered a quiet smile, the kind that holds both sorrow and gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly, "for not turning away." Lila stepped forward, holding a folder they'd restored. Inside were a few preserved drawings from children in Brazil, labeled with their names and ages. "We've done our best to save what matters," she said. "But I think it always mattered, even before we found it." Keanu took the folder, opened it slowly. A crayon drawing of a boy and his mother under a red umbrella. The caption read, "Thank you for sending my mom to the hospital." On the back, Keanu's old signature, faded but still legible, was accompanied by a short note. "Stay dry. The world needs your colors." He closed the folder and looked up at them again. "You didn't just preserve paper," he said. "You protected moments. You honored people I never got to see again." Monica spoke next. "We've seen a lot of celebrities. This wasn't that." He nodded once. "It wasn't meant to be seen. It was just meant to be felt." They stood in silence for a moment longer. Then Keanu walked toward the heart of the basement. The shelves they had reconstructed were lined with dry archival boxes now labeled by region and year. South America, 1994. Northern California, 1997. Rural Thailand, 2001. Each one held stories he remembered not by date but by face. Keanu stopped before one labeled simply Kenya Outreach. He rested his hand on the lid. No cameras had followed him there. It had been a spontaneous trip after reading a letter from a boy whose brother had died from preventable illness. Keanu had flown out with a small team, quietly partnering with local nurses and teachers. He didn't tell his agent, didn't post a photo, just went. Now, opening the box again, he saw the drawing of a giraffe made from sandpaper and glue. A child's thank you letter, in careful handwriting, written on the back of a food carton. The letter was smudged with thumbprints and joy. Keanu's hand trembled slightly as he lifted the letter to the light. No part of it had been meant for the world. This wasn't charity work documented for promotion. This was life, shared, humbly and fully. He continued through the room, greeting each piece of the past like an old friend. There were names he hadn't spoken aloud in decades, stories that had never left his heart. He paused beside a restored photo frame propped on a crate. An image of him in a hospital gown, holding a child undergoing chemotherapy. The child was smiling. Keanu's own head had been shaved in solidarity. Monica whispered from behind him, "You became what you needed when you were hurting." He turned slightly, nodding. Maybe I just didn't want anyone else to feel alone in it. Lila knelt near a stack of transcripts from the old videos. She opened one and began to read. It was a letter from a teen named Chloe who had battled depression. She wrote about how Keanu's reply helped her speak up to her parents. She was now a guidance counselor, helping kids just like herself. Keanu crouched beside Lila. His gaze lingered on Chloe's words. He whispered, "She made it. That's what matters." Then, slowly, he lowered himself to the floor, legs crossed, hands folded in his lap. The room fell completely still. No one moved as Keanu sat there in quiet reflection. The room, once soaked in mud and silence, now felt like a chapel, not because of its condition, but because of what it held. These weren't props or memorabilia. They were echoes of real lives, pieces of real souls. Keanu bowed his head. He wasn't grieving what was lost. He was giving thanks for what had been preserved. A few feet away, a laminated photo from 1995 showed him helping a child build a kite. That child had written in his adult update, "I fly with children now." Soft footsteps approached from behind. Dante, holding a small, restored item, knelt beside Keanu. It was a laminated card with a quote scrawled in blue ink. "You don't need to shine for the world. You just need to be a light for one person." It had been in one of the damaged journals. Dante didn't know who wrote it, Keanu or someone else. But now it sat between them like truth. Keanu looked at it, his eyes glassy. Then, quietly, he whispered, "That's all I ever hoped to be." He looked up, eyes scanning the room again. What once was flooded had now become something sacred. Not polished, not perfect, but deeply human. There were still water stains and the faint scent of old paper and damp wood, but what mattered was intact. He stood slowly and walked to the far end of the room, where they had placed one final folder in a glass case. It was labeled, "Lives Changed," each one featuring a smile. No names, no dates, just joy captured in stillness. As Keanu reached the doorway, he turned back to the team. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Monica stepped forward. "We should be thanking you." He shook his head. "No, the world doesn't need to thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. That's more than enough." And with that, he gave one last look to the room, the archive of a life that was never meant to be seen, only felt. Then he stepped into the light, leaving behind the echoes of every child, every moment, every soul he had quietly held. 1 year had passed since the flood changed everything. Where water once claimed the quiet corners of Keanu Reeves' basement, a new space now bloomed, digitized, cataloged, and lovingly preserved by people who had once been strangers. That basement, though no longer physically whole, had transformed into something living. The work, born in secret, had found its second breath in the hands of those it had quietly touched. Across the country, stories had begun to surface. Not from Keanu himself, of course. He remained in the background, never offering interviews, never seeking credit. But the children he once helped, now grown, had come forward. Some anonymously, others openly. Their words painted a mosaic of quiet impact. From this mosaic, the Still Light Project was born. It began with a small group of people who had once received art supplies, tuition help, or simply a kind letter when they needed it most. Now, as adults, they formed a foundation, not to honor a celebrity, but to pass on what had been passed to them. The name came from a phrase found in one of Keanu's early journal entries. He had written, "Even in the darkest places, there's still light. You just have to be willing to look for it." The group adopted the name with reverence. No photos of Keanu appeared on their website. No name listed him as founder. That was intentional. He had asked for anonymity, and they respected it. The point was never to draw attention to the man. It was to continue his mission. They began by funding mentorship programs in underfunded schools. Then came mobile art studios for children in hospitals. Mental health grants followed. Each initiative was quiet, careful, human. One of the first graduates of their scholarship program later returned to volunteer full-time, saying, "I don't know who helped me when I was young, but I'm here because of them." In a quiet corner of the digitized archive, Rosa sat with headphones on, reviewing a voice recording from a girl named Emma, who had once battled severe depression. Keanu's voice on the tape was soft, encouraging, personal. Rosa removed the headphones and simply whispered, "He saved her," without anyone knowing. The Still Light Project wasn't just a foundation anymore. It had become a movement. Within a year, more than 100 volunteers had joined. Not because of flashy campaigns or celebrity endorsements, but because they had once been that scared kid who got a letter, or the teenager who received paints when they thought no one believed in their talent. They came to give back, quietly, just like he had done. Rosa walked through the new headquarters, a modest rented office in a downtown building. Its walls were covered in framed artwork, not from famous artists, but from children. Each piece had a story. A little boy in Ohio who drew superheroes while recovering from surgery. A girl in Guatemala who painted birds after surviving a house fire. A teenager in Chicago who used charcoal sketches to process grief after losing her brother. All of them had one common thread. They'd once received unexpected kindness from someone they never met. And though they still didn't speak his name publicly, within the team, Keanu was their light. Rosa paused by a glass display case in the main hallway. Inside was a single laminated page, the letter Keanu had once written and left behind, "In case I'm gone." They had received permission from him to preserve it, but never publish it. It wasn't for attention. It was there to remind them of the why. Sometimes, Rosa would sit on the steps in the back alley of the building, late at night, just thinking. Not of the foundation's progress or the grants they'd secured, but of the ripple. A child saved by one act of compassion, who then saved another. And another, and another. That's what the Still Light Project was now. A quiet ripple moving through the world like wind, seen only through the leaves it moved. One afternoon, Rosa received an envelope, no return address. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a dog, 2 trees, and a smiling child. On the back it read in crayon, "Thank you for sending the pencils. I want to be an artist." No signature, no explanation. Just a child, somewhere in the world, already carrying the legacy forward. Rosa placed the drawing on her desk, gently smoothing the creases. It reminded her of the first photos they had found in that flooded basement, the ones of Keanu sitting cross-legged with children in hospital wards, or laughing beside a boy in a wheelchair. None of those moments had been shared with the world, but they had mattered more than any award or headline ever could. In a small side room of the Still Light Project's building, There was a wall covered entirely with handwritten notes. Letters from doctors, teachers, parents, and children. Some were simple thank yous. Others told stories of how a single act had saved a life. Rosa called it the Wall of Echoes, because that's what Keanu had created. An echo, one that continued long after the sound of his own voice had faded. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, gentle, and endless. On the anniversary of the flood, Rosa organized a quiet gathering in the garden outside the building. Former recipients, now grown, stood in a circle. Some brought photos. Some brought music. One young man read aloud a poem he'd written after reading Keanu's journal entry about losing someone close. No one said Keanu's name. They didn't need to. The Still Light project wasn't about him. It was about what he'd believed in. As the sun dipped below the skyline, a little girl stepped forward, holding a letter in her small hands. She'd written it that morning, asking for help getting art supplies for her school. She had no idea who might read it, only that she believed someone out there cared enough to try. Rosa took the letter and smiled. Another child, another ripple, another spark in the quiet legacy of a man who had never wanted to be seen, only felt. Before you go, let me ask you this. Have you ever been impacted by someone's kindness in secret? And what story would you like us to tell next about Keanu Reeves? Let us know in the comments, because sometimes the smallest stories carry the biggest light, and your voice may inspire the next act of quiet, unforgettable kindness. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.